For a moment, imagine that you had never met the person you love most. They simply were never there. No first conversation, no shared memories, no presence in your life at all. Notice the feeling that appears. It is not grief, because you cannot grieve what never existed. It is something sharper, something closer to sudden, unexpected gratitude. This is not an accident. It is the central mechanism of one of the most powerful psychological practices ever documented. The Stoics called it Premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, and they built an entire philosophy of contentment around it. Here is the paradox that makes it so effective. The worse the scenario you imagine, the more grateful you feel for what you actually have. Modern gratitude journaling asks you to count your blessings. This ancient technique asks you to imagine losing them. And according to the research, imagining loss works better. The practice of premeditatio malorum was central to Stoic philosophy for centuries. Seneca, writing from Rome in the 1st century, advised his students to rehearse poverty, illness, and exile in their minds before any of these things ever happened. He was not being pessimistic, he was being strategic. Seneca understood that we do not suffer because of what happens to us. We suffer because of the gap between what happens and what we expected. By closing that gap deliberately, by imagining the worst before it arrives, we remove its power to destroy us. But there was a second benefit Seneca described that is often overlooked. When we visualize losing something and then open our eyes to find it still there, we experience it as if it were new. The relationship we take for granted becomes vivid again. The health we ignore becomes precious. The ordinary Tuesday morning becomes something worth protecting. Epictetus took this even further. He taught his students to remind themselves, every time they embraced their child, that the child was mortal. Every time they drank from a favorite cup, they should whisper that it could break tomorrow. This sounds morbid to modern ears, but Epictetus was not teaching fear, he was teaching presence. He believed that the only way to truly appreciate what we have is to confront regularly and honestly the reality that we will not have it forever. For the Stoics, this was not a secondary exercise. It was the foundation of their entire approach to happiness. They considered premeditatio malorum their most valuable tool because it solved the one problem that wealth, success, and comfort could never solve on their own, which is the human tendency to stop noticing what is good. Modern psychology has a name for that tendency. It is called hedonic adaptation, and it is the reason why the new car stops feeling exciting after 3 months, why the promotion loses its glow after a few weeks, and why even the most loving relationship can start to feel like background noise. We adapt to positive experiences rapidly and automatically. Gratitude journaling, the most popular modern intervention, attempts to fight this by asking us to write down things we are grateful for. It works to some degree, but a landmark study suggests there is something that works better. In 2008, researchers Ming-Kyung Koo, Sarah Algoe, Timothy Wilson, and Daniel Gilbert published a study that compared 2 approaches. One group of participants was asked to write about why a positive event in their life, such as meeting a romantic partner, had been likely to happen. This is essentially what gratitude journaling does. It asks us to reflect on good things. The second group was asked to imagine how that same positive event might never have happened at all. They were asked to mentally subtract it from their lives. The results were striking. The participants who imagined the absence of the positive event reported significantly greater happiness and satisfaction than those who simply reflected on its presence. Koo and her colleagues explained this through the lens of surprise. When we think about why something good happened, we construct a narrative that makes it feel inevitable. And inevitable things do not inspire gratitude. But when we imagine how easily it could have not happened, we reintroduce uncertainty. We feel the fragility of the good thing, and that fragility makes it valuable again. This is exactly what the Stoics were doing 2,000 years before the study was published. They were not being dark or negative. They were systematically reversing hedonic adaptation by making the familiar feel fragile. So, how do we actually practice this? The method is simple, and it requires no journal, no app, and no special equipment. Set aside 5 minutes, ideally in the morning before the momentum of the day takes over. Sit quietly and choose one thing you currently take for granted. Start with your health. Imagine waking up tomorrow, unable to walk. Feel the weight of that. Imagine the effort of every small task, the dependence on others, the loss of freedom you never consciously valued. Then open your eyes, move your legs, feel the floor beneath your feet. That feeling, that sudden rush of awareness, is the practice working. Next, try it with a relationship. Picture your life without your closest friend, not their death, but their complete absence from your history. No conversations, no support, no shared laughter. Sit with the emptiness of that. Then return to reality and notice how differently you think about sending them a message today. You can apply this to work as well. Imagine losing your job tomorrow, not as a catastrophe to fear, but as a lens through which to see what your current position actually provides. Purpose, income, routine, connection. These are things we stop seeing precisely because they are always there. As for frequency, the research suggests that practicing this 2 to 3 times per week is optimal. Daily practice can lead to diminishing returns, while weekly practice may not be frequent enough to counteract hedonic adaptation consistently. The key is regularity, without excess. Seneca once wrote that we should rehearse the things we fear so that when fortune strikes, we have already beaten it. This is not a philosophy of despair. It is the opposite. It is a disciplined refusal to let comfort make us blind. There is a common misunderstanding that Stoicism is a form of nihilism, that it asks us to stop caring about things because we might lose them. But that misreads the entire tradition. The Stoics cared deeply. They cared so deeply that they refused to let their appreciation become automatic. They chose to see the value in what they had by regularly confronting the possibility that it could disappear. Nihilism says nothing matters. Stoicism says everything matters, and because it matters, we must not fall asleep to it. Negative visualization is not about expecting the worst. It is about refusing to take the best for granted. We live in a culture that tells us happiness comes from getting more. The Stoics understood something far more durable. Happiness comes from fully seeing what we already have. And the fastest way to see it is to imagine, even for a moment, what it would feel like if it were gone. That is the practice. That is the paradox. And it has been working for over 2,000 years.